saw it again today. Another comment section, another familiar sentence. Why does anyone watch this? How does this person have millions? The words look casual, almost harmless, but behind them there's a quiet assumption that popularity needs permission, that taste needs approval, and that if someone else likes something you don't understand, it must be wrong. I used to scroll past it quickly, not my problem, just noise on a screen. But the longer I watched, the more it felt strange, because the internet was supposed to do the opposite. It was supposed to open doors, not close them. When I was younger, taste was limited. You liked what TV showed you, what radio played, what magazines printed. Everything flowed in one direction, top down, and everyone below was expected to follow. But the world changed. Now a camera in an idea can reach millions. A strange hobby can find its tribe. A quiet obsession can become a community, and suddenly someone somewhere is watching a channel about restoring old cameras. Someone else is learning everything about rare sneakers. Another person analyzing obscure films. Another building an entire world around skateboards or trains or vintage keyboards. And the funny thing is, they're all called the same thing: fans. Or something old, or something people used to say with a little bit of mockery. Otaku, at first it meant someone strange, someone obsessed, someone too deep into something niche. But language changes the way culture does. An obsession stopped being shameful, it became identity. You love fishing, you're a fishing otaku. You love skating, you're a skate otaku. You love sound design, you're a synth otaku. You love anime, you're an anime otaku. The word expanded until it meant something simpler. Someone who cares deeply, someone who dives deeper than the surface. And in a world full of endless information, depth isn't embarrassing, it's impressive. The real question now isn't why does anyone like that? The real question is why do we feel the need to judge it? Because everyone is someone's version of strange. Every hobby looks unusual to someone else, and the algorithm knows this. That's why your feed looks different from mine. Your curiosity builds your world. Mine builds mine, and neither one needs validation. That's the strange freedom of this era. You don't have to chase mainstream approval, you can chase fascination. Micro communities, micro interests, micro passions, thousands of small universes existing at the same time. And suddenly the old words lose meaning. Mainstream, underground, popular, weird, those lines blur because popularity is now fragmented. Millions of people can watch something and another million can ignore it completely. Both realities existing together, and that's okay. You don't have to understand every taste. Understanding is optional. Respect is not. If someone finds joy in something bad, joy is enough reason. You don't need to share it. You don't need to explain it. You don't even need to notice it. Just let it exist. That's the quiet beauty of this era. You can build a world around what you love, and somewhere someone else is doing the same. Maybe about music, maybe about games, maybe about cameras, maybe about fishing, maybe about something you've never heard of. But that doesn't make it smaller, it just makes it different. And difference is what built the internet, not conformity. So the next time a comment appears asking why does anyone like this, maybe the better answer is why does it bother you? Because the truth is simple, everyone is an otaku for something. Everyone just defending their own hill. If someone wants to die on that hill, let them. You're standing on yours too. living in different feeds. That's the simplest explanation. You scroll past something and feel confusion. Someone else scrolls and feels excitement. Same video, different reaction. The algorithm doesn't decide what matters. It reflects what you notice, what you click, what you replay, what you stay curious about. And slowly your world forms. Not the entire internet, just your version of it. Someone else is building theirs completely different. One feed filled with gaming, another filled with cooking, another filled with film analysis, another filled with obscure music, another filled with vintage cameras, another filled with fishing techniques, another filled with sneaker culture. Millions of feeds, millions of realities running parallel. And sometimes when those realities overlap, confusion appears. Someone sees a creator they've never heard of, millions of followers, thousands of comments, and the question emerges: why is this popular? But popularity is no longer universal. It's contextual. A creator can be invisible to most of the world and essential to the people who care. A channel about restoring radios, a channel about mechanical keyboards, a channel about deep music theory, a channel about animation timing, a channel about skateboard wheels. These spaces thrive not because everyone understands, but because the right people do. That's the shift. The internet replaced broadcast culture with curiosity culture. You don't have to appeal to everyone, you only need to connect, and connection doesn't require mass attention. It requires shared fascination. Two people who love the same detail will talk longer than 2,000 people who only have care. That's why niche communities feel powerful, because they're built on genuine interest, not casual attention. Not trending numbers, just curiosity, and curiosity is contagious. Someone passionate about something small can make it feel huge. You hear the excitement, you see the detail, you recognize the dedication, and suddenly you care too. Not because it's popular, but because passion transfers, energy transfers, curiosity transfers. That's how communities grow, quietly, organically, authentically. But critics often miss that. They look at the numbers and assume randomness. They assume luck, they assume the audience must be mistaken. But the audience is rarely random. They arrive because something resonated, something felt honest, something felt interesting. And interest doesn't need approval, it only needs attention. We're living in different feeds, different worlds, different fascinations. And that's not fragmentation, that's freedom. Freedom to care about what excites you, freedom to dive deep without explanation, freedom to explore without worrying if it makes sense to everyone else, because it doesn't need to. The curiosity's enough reason, and somewhere someone scrolling through their own feed feels the same way, watching the same video, learning the same details, smiling at the same obsession. And suddenly you're part of the same world, even if you never meet. Different feeds, same curiosity. And that's more than enough. Somewhere on the internet, there's a quiet club, no membership, no invitation, no official name, just people who love the same strange thing. Maybe it's music production, maybe it's restoring old electronics, maybe it's animation or skateboards or film cameras or the history of sneakers or the mechanics of fishing reels or some detail most people never notice. But for the people inside it matters. The internet created millions of these small clubs, tiny universes where curiosity is the only requirement. You don't need to impress anyone, you don't need to explain yourself, you only need to care. That's what brings people together, not popularity, not approval and interest, and ends its own gravity. When someone speaks with real enthusiasm, people recognize it, they hear the excitement, they see the patience, they feel the dedication, and suddenly a stranger becomes familiar, because passion translates without explanation. You don't need to share the hobby to respect the energy. That's why these communities grow quietly. Someone uploads a video, 10 people watching, 50 then 1,000. Not because the topic changed, but because more people found the signal. More people recognize the fascination. But outside that space, someone always asks, why is this popular? Why do people watch this? It's a strange reaction. Because the question is never really about the creator, it's about difference. People aren't comfortable when something succeeds outside their understanding. They assume if I don't get it, it must be meaningless. But curiosity doesn't work like that. The world is too large for everyone to care about the same thing. Some people love fashion, some people love coding, some people love football, some people love animation, some people love music theory, some people love mechanical keyboards. Every interest deep, detailed meaning to someone and meaningless to someone else. That difference is normal. It's healthy, it means people are thinking, exploring, diving deeper, instead of following the same narrow path. The internet didn't just create entertainment, it created identity. People no longer have to pretend they can openly care, openly study, openly obsess, without worrying if the interest looks strange, because somewhere someone else feels the same fascination. When those people meet, a club forms, not formal, not official, just a shared understanding, a quiet agreement that passion is never embarrassing, it's admirable. So when someone asks, why does anyone watch this? Maybe the answer is beautifully simple, because curiosity recognizes curiosity, because passion recognizes passion. Because people naturally gather around the things they love, even if the rest of the world doesn't notice, and that's okay. Every club doesn't need the whole world, it only needs the people who care. There's always a hidden audience, people you never see, people who never comment, people who never explain, but they're watching, listening, learning, and quietly enjoying the same thing you do. The internet taught us to measure everything: views, subscribers, likes, numbers that look clear but never tell the full story, because attention is rarely loud, most of the time it's silent. Someone finds a video late at night, after work, after school, after everything else is slowed down. They click, not because it's trending, but because the title touches a small curiosity. Maybe it's about music, maybe about a strange hobby, maybe about something they loved as a kid, something they thought no one else cared about anymore. And suddenly someone is explaining it with passion, with detail, with the kind of enthusiasm that only comes from obsession. conversation. How many people felt excited about the same detail? How many people smiled quietly when someone finally described something they love? Communities are not always loud, sometimes they're silent. 1,000 people watching without a word, 1,000 people learning without announcing it, 1,000 people enjoy without needing recognition. That's the hidden audience, and they're everywhere. Someone repairing old cameras, someone studying sound design, someone explaining film theory, someone talking about obscure games, someone restoring vintage machines, someone analyzing stories, all of them speaking, all of them sharing, and somewhere someone listening, completely fascinated, because passion doesn't need universal approval. It only needs one person who understands, and then another and another, until suddenly what looked like a small corner becomes a community, not built by algorithms but by shared curiosity. That's the part numbers can't show. The quiet audience, the silent supporters of people who never come in but return every week because they care, because they recognize, because they feel seen. The world calls them viewers, but they're more than that, they're proof that passion always finds its people, even when no one else notices. And sometimes the most meaningful audiences are the ones you never hear. There's always a final comment buried somewhere near the bottom of the thread. After hundreds of opinions, after sarcasm, after criticism, after the usual question, why is this popular? It's a strange ritual. A creator shares something, something honest, something they care about, and before the conversation even begins, someone appears ready to dismiss it, as if taste must pass inspection, as if curiosity needs approval. The internet is full of this energy, people measuring value through their own preferences, confusing personal taste with universal truth. But culture has never worked that way, it never will. Every movement, every genre, every community started small. Hip-hop once sounded strange to people who grew up with rock and jazz. Anime once looked unfamiliar to people who only watch Western cartoons. Gaming once looked childish to people who didn't understand its complexity. And yet each one grew, not because critics approved, but because enthusiasts existed. People who cared, people who studied, people who explored, people who built communities around shared fascination. That's how culture moves, not through agreements, through curiosity. Somewhere someone uploads a video explaining something detailed, something specific. Maybe it's about music production, maybe about restoring old cameras, maybe about animation or film theory, maybe about mechanical keyboards or sneakers, maybe about something you never even considered. And suddenly a few viewers appear, watching closely, listening carefully, because they recognize the same fascination, they recognize the same obsession, they recognize the same curiosity. That's when the magic happens, because passion has a language, a rhythm and energy. You don't have to share the exact interest to feel the authenticity. When someone cares deeply, you can hear it, you can see it, you can feel it. That sincerity creates connection, not mass connection, but meaningful connection. Meaningful connection is stronger. 1,000 people who truly care will build more culture than 1,000,000 people who barely notice. But critics rarely see that they scroll quickly, they judge instantly, they measure success through their own expectations. And when those expectations aren't met, they assume the audience must be wrong. But the audience is rarely random, the audience is simply curious, curious enough to stay, curious enough to learn, curious enough to appreciate. The internet changed something, not just how information travels, but identity forms. People no longer need permission to explore. They don't need broadcast approval. They don't need mainstream validation. They only need curiosity, and curiosity creates communities. Small ones, large ones, loud ones, quiet ones, but all of them real. Every hobby, every niche, every strange fascination finds its audience, because somewhere someone shares the same interest. Someone else has the same questions. Someone else feels the same excitement. And suddenly the so-called strange interest becomes normal inside that community. That's the power of the internet. Not uniformity, diversity of curiosity. Millions of small worlds existing simultaneously. Each one valid, each one important. Even if outsiders don't understand, you don't have to understand someone else's passion. Understanding is optional, respect is not, because everyone, even the loudest critics, is something they care deeply about. Something they defend, something they explain with endless enthusiasm. Something they would stand on, even when others don't get it. Everyone has a hill, and maybe that's the real reason people get defensive. They're protecting their own. So the next time someone asks, why does anyone watch this? Maybe the answer is simple, because someone cares, and caring is enough reason. Somewhere along the way, people started asking a strange question: is that worth liking? As if enjoyment needs approval, as if curiosity requires permission. The internet promised freedom of expression, freedom of information, freedom of creation. But sometimes the loudest voices aren't creators, they're critics, people watching from the outside, trying to measure value in unfamiliar passions. You see it every day, a video appear, a creator explaining something, maybe obscure, maybe niche, maybe something most people have never considered. And instantly the comments arrive: why does anyone watch this? Why is this person popular? Why do people care? But the real question is simpler: why does caring make people uncomfortable? Passion is powerful, because it reveals identity. When someone loves something deeply, it shows who they are, their curiosity, their patience, their dedication, the hours they spend learning details, testing ideas, improving skills, understanding something beyond surface level. That kind of passion is impossible to fake. You can see it in the way someone explains, you can hear it in the way someone talks, and people recognize it even if they don't share the same interests. That's why communities form, not around popularity, but around authenticity. Someone uploads a video about repairing vintage radios, and suddenly 1,000 people appear, not random viewers, but people who care about the same thing. People who recognize the language of fascination, because passion has a certain rhythm, a certain energy. You can feel it, and when you feel it, you stay, you subscribe, you support. Not because the creator is famous, but because the creator is genuine. But critics rarely see that, they only see numbers, subscriber counts, view totals, trending charts. They assume popularity must follow their own taste, but taste has never been universal. It has always been personal. Someone loves film photography, someone else loves digital art, someone loves skateboarding, someone else loves statistics, someone loves anime, someone else loves cooking, someone loves music theory, someone else loves gaming strategy. Each interest deep, detailed, meaningful to the person who cares, and meaningless to someone who doesn't. That difference is normal, not a problem. But sometimes people mistake difference for error. They assume if they don't understand, it must not matter. But the world is far too large for everyone to care about the same things, and that's the beauty of it. The internet didn't just connect people, it revealed diversity. reality, not just of culture but of curiosity. Millions of small worlds, millions of tiny communities, each one built around a shared fascination, and every one of them is valid. You don't need to understand someone's hobby, you don't need to share their excitement, you don't even need to watch their videos, all you need is respect. Respect for the fact that caring deeply about something is never strange, it's human. So the next time a comment appears questioning someone's passion, maybe the answer is quite simple and obvious. People care because caring is what makes life interesting. Because curiosity is what builds culture. Because passion is what turns small ideas into communities and communities, into movements who meet in communities, into movements don't need permission to care. You never did. The only permission you needed was your own. The algorithm brought them to me, not because I searched, not because I asked, just one quiet recommendation. Slide in between familiar videos, a creator I had never heard of. No studio lighting, no massive production, just a person and a strange fascination. They were explaining something small, something incredibly specific, the history of a forgotten device, the mechanics of a niche hobby. Details no mainstream show would ever broadcast, and yet thousands of people were watching, listening carefully, learning. Scrolling through the comments felt like discovering a tiny city. Everyone speaking a language outsiders might not understand, but inside that space it made perfect sense. And then I saw it, the inevitable question: why does anyone watch this? How is this channel big? The sentence always arrives like an echo, as if curiosity itself needs justification. But the truth is simple, the internet didn't just expand entertainment, it expanded identity. For the first time you could love something obscure without feeling alone. A hobby that once lived inside a small room now had a global audience, and suddenly the quiet enthusiast became a guide. The passionate amateur became a teacher. The so-called strange interest became someone's favorite channel, and the word people once used to describe that obsession was strange itself. Will tackle at first it sounded negative, too deep, too intense, too committed. Over time that word shifted, because passion is difficult to mock. Once you see its depth, someone can spend 10 years studying sound, or skateboards, or vintage film cameras, or fishing lures, or anime story arcs, or game design mechanics, or train routes across continents. And when they speak about it, the excitement is undeniable. Their eyes change, their voice sharpens, their curiosity becomes contagious. That energy is what the algorithm recognizes, not popularity, authenticity. Because people can feel it, you can hear it in the way someone explains, you can see it in the way someone edits, you can sense it in the quiet confidence of someone who truly cares. And somewhere in another room, another city, another country, someone else who shares that obsession clicks the video, and suddenly a community appears. Not massive, not universal, but real. And that's what critics miss. They assume attention must be universal, but attention is now fragmented. Millions of tiny audiences existing simultaneously, each one passionate about something different, each one forming their own little culture. And that culture doesn't require permission, it just requires curiosity. You might scroll past a dozen videos today, and none of them make sense to you. reflects that it mirrors curiosity. Your curiosity is not the same as mine. Your interest builds your feet, mine build mine, and both feeds are valid worlds. That's the quiet revolution of this era. You no longer need a broadcasting network. You no longer need approval from gatekeepers. You only need interest and honesty and patience to keep making something for the people who care. Maybe the audience is small, maybe it's massive. Either way it exists because someone somewhere shares that fascination. So the next time a comment asks, why does anyone watch this? Maybe the answer is easier than they think, because someone loves it. And in a world endless choices, love for something is reason enough. The signal started small, a quiet upload in the middle of the night. No marketing, no press, just a person sharing something they genuinely love. Maybe it was a review, maybe a breakdown, maybe just a long explanation about a tiny detail most people ignore. But the detail mattered, and the way they spoke about it made it clear. This wasn't performance, it was passion. At first only a few people watched, a handful of comments, a small group recognizing something familiar. Not fame recognition, because passion has a certain tone. You hear it when someone explains, you see it when someone edits. There's patience in it, curiosity in it, and a strange joy in exploring something deeply. That signal moves quietly, it doesn't explode overnight. It spreads slowly, one viewer, then another, each one finding the video because they care. And when enough people care about the same thing, a community appears. Not by design, just by shared fascination. But outside that space, someone always asks, why is this popular? Why do people watch this? As if popularity needs universal logic, but it never did. The most interesting things in culture always started as someone's obsession. A small group caring deeply before anyone else noticed. Hip-hop started that way. Graffiti, skate culture, gaming communities, film analysis, anime fandoms. Every movement, every genre, every scene began with people who cared more than the average person. And sometimes those people were called strange, obsessed, too deep to invest it. But over time, the world caught up, because passion has gravity. It pulls attention and creates energy. It inspires others. The internet didn't invent passion, it revealed it for the first time. People could see how many others shared the same curiosity. Someone who loves cameras, someone who studies music, someone who collects sneakers, someone who analyzes stories, someone who memorizes statistics, someone who learns every detail about a craft. All of them obsessed, all of them connect through the quiet signal of interest. And suddenly, being deeply interested doesn't look strange, it looks normal, because everyone is passionate about something. Even the people who criticize others, they defend their own interests with the same intensity. They just don't notice it, but the truth remains. Everyone has a hill, something they care about, something they will explain with endless enthusiasm, something they will defend even if others don't understand. And that's not weakness, that's identity. So when someone asks, why does anyone watch this, maybe they're really asking, why does anyone care? And the answer is beautifully simple, because caring is is what makes culture move. Caring is what builds communities. Caring is what transforms curiosity into something meaningful. The signal begins small, but passion amplifies it. And if the signal is honest, people will hear it eventually, even if they never expected to listen. The internet looks massive, but curiosity makes it small. Somewhere, someone uploads a video about something most people ignore. A tiny subject, a strange hobby, a detail too specific for television. Yet people watch, not millions at first, just a few, but those few care. And caring is stronger than popularity. One viewer becomes 10, 10 becomes 100, because passion travels quietly. When someone explains something they truly love, you hear it. The patience, the excitement, the small details, the way they notice what others overlook. That energy is contagious. You don't need to share the hobby to recognize the sincerity. That's why people stay, not because it's famous, but because it's real. Still, someone always appears in the comments asking, why does anyone watch this? Why is this popular? But popularity is not universal anymore. Everyone lives inside their own feed. One person watches fashion reviews, another studies cameras, another analyzes movies, another learns about sound, another restores machines, another watches animation. Each one building a small world of curiosity. These worlds overlap sometimes, but often they exist quietly side by side. And that's the beauty of the internet. You don't need everyone's approval. You only need your people, the ones who recognize the same fascination. Because passion is a signal, and signals travel across cities, across languages, across strangers, until someone else hears it and thinks, I care about this too. Suddenly a small world appears, not loud, not trending, just connected. The critics might never understand, but they don't need to. Curiosity doesn't require agreement. It only requires attention. And somewhere, someone is always listening. There's a strange confidence in liking something alone. Not trending, not recommended, not surrounded by millions of opinions. Just you and something that caught your curiosity. The internet was supposed to make everything louder, more crowded, more competitive. But sometimes it does the opposite. Sometimes it leads you into quiet corners, channels with small audiences, creators speaking calmly about things no one else seems to notice. And somehow that's where the real fascination lives. A person reviews explaining how to restore a cassette deck. Someone teaching the perfect way to sharpen a knife. Someone analyzing the smallest details in a game. These aren't things you would find on traditional television, but here they thrive because passion doesn't need mass appeal. It only needs recognition, and recognition can come from 10 people or 10 million. The number changes, the curiosity doesn't. Still, every time someone rises, every time a creator finds an audience, the same question appears: why do people watch this? It's a strange reaction, as if the existence of someone else's interest is somehow offensive, as if taste needs universal agreement. But taste has never worked that way. Even before the internet, people gathered around different passions. Music scenes are communities, sports cultures, subcultures, each one looking strange to outsiders. Hip-hop itself was once dismissed, too niche, too underground, too unfamiliar, until it wasn't, until the same thing everyone mocked became the center. The truth is simple, everything begins with someone's obsession, a quiet fascination, something others don't understand yet. And those obsessions grow when they meet another person who feels the same curiosity. That's how scenes start, that's how communities grow. Not by mass approval, but by shared fascination. You don't need the whole world, you only need your people. And then the internet finally made that possible. You can love something, dive deep into it, study it, celebrate it, and somewhere a stranger who has never met you feels exactly the same way. And suddenly you're not strange, you're connected, but critics don't see that. They only see numbers, they measure popularity without understanding passion, because passion doesn't look impressive from the outside. It looks obsessive, focused, too specific, but from the inside it feels electric. The joy of discovering tiny details, the excitement of understanding something most people overlook, the satisfaction of explaining it to someone who cares. That's the real reward, not approval, understanding. And once you experience that, the comments stop mattering, the numbers stop mattering, the judgment fades, because curiosity is stronger than validation. You begin to realize the internet didn't just create audiences, it created freedom. Freedom to be deeply interested, freedom to care about small things, freedom to explore without asking if it's popular enough. So the next time someone asks, why does anyone watch this? Maybe the answer is simple, because curiosity doesn't aspiration, and passion doesn't need majority support. It only needs someone willing to pay attention. And somewhere someone always is. Sometimes the loudest voices, yeah, I'll do these curious. They scroll past everything, judging quickly, reacting instantly, leaving comments like echoes. My echoes don't create culture. Curiosity does. The internet is a strange mirror. It shows people what they already believe and hides what they refuse to explore. If you believe taste should look familiar, everything unusual feels wrong. But if you believe curiosity is valuable, everything unusual feels interesting. That difference creates two kinds of people: observers and explorers. Observers watch trends, explorers create them. Observers ask, why is this popular? Explorers ask, ask, why is this interesting? Some taking question changes everything, because interest is the beginning of understanding. Somewhere a creator uploads a video, a song, an explanation, something detailed, something personal, and the audience appears not randomly but intentionally. People who recognize the same fascination. That recognition is powerful because passion creates a language, a shared rhythm. You hear it in the way someone speaks, you hear it in the way someone sings. A husky tone, slightly imperfect, slightly rough but full of emotion. And suddenly the sound feels real, not polished, not manufactured, just human. That's what people respond to. Authenticity, a voice that feels honest, a perspective that feels personal. Because in a world full of noise, honesty stands out. It cuts through even if the style is unfamiliar, even if the genre is unexpected. People feel it, and when they feel it, they stay. That's how communities form, not through confection, through connection. A few listeners, then a few more, each one recognizing something genuine. And suddenly what once looked niche feels meaningful. The critics still exist, they always will, but criticism is easy, curiosity is harder. Curiosity requires patience, it requires humility, it requires admitting you might not know everything. And that's uncomfortable for people who prefer certainty. But the world doesn't move forward through certainty, it moves through curiosity. Every genre, every creative movement, every cultural shift started with people who were curious enough to try something new. Even when others questioned it, even when others dismissed it, even when others laughed, those people stayed. They kept building, kept creating, kept sharing. And eventually someone else listened, someone else understood, someone else joined. That's how the internet works. Quiet signals, finding curious minds across distance, across cultures, across language. A voice, a rhythm, an idea echoing through feeds until someone hears it and recognizes the same curiosity. Because curiosity is louder than criticism. Even when the critics speak first, the echo fades, but genuine interest stays. Growing slowly, building quietly until the noise disappears and the signal becomes clear. They say taste divides people, but that's not what I see. I see rooms full of different music, different screens, different obsessions, all existing at the same time. You might hear my melody and skip it instantly, I might replay it for hours. You might scroll past the creator explaining something obscure. I might stay until the end. Neither of us is wrong, we're just tuned differently. That's the part people forget. The internet didn't create conflict. Tape revealed variety before this. Taste was narrow. Television decided what was worth watching. Radio decided what was worth hearing. But now curiosity decides your curiosity. Mine, everyone building their own world. Someone somewhere is deeply invested in something you've never noticed. A unique genre, a forgotten artist, a strange hobby, a tiny detail. And to them that detail matters more than trending topics, more than viral clips. Because passion doesn't measure itself against popularity, it measures itself against curiosity. Still the same question appears. Why do people like this? Why does anyone care? The answer is surprisingly simple. Because someone connects, connection doesn't require mass agreement. It only requires resonance. One voice, one sound, one idea. Finding the right ears, the right audience at the right moment. That's how culture spreads quietly. One person discovering, then another, until suddenly what once looked strange feels familiar. Music does that. You hear a voice that sounds different, a tone that feels raw, unpolished, real. And suddenly the emotion cuts deeper. Because perfection is not always powerful. Sometimes imperfection is what makes something human. A husky voice breaking through a melody, a rough texture inside a clean beat, a moment of vulnerability inside rhythm. That's the balance. Emotion passion. That's why music survives across generations, across trends, across communities. Someone hears something and it resonates, and resonance creates belonging. Suddenly a stranger's song feels personal, a voice you never knew feels familiar, and a rhythm you almost skip becomes the one you replay. That's the quiet power of taste. It builds bridges between people who would never meet. Different backgrounds, different interests, different worlds connected by a moment of curiosity. So when someone asks, why do people like this? Maybe the answer is already plain. Someone else has won the place. Because the truth is simple. Taste doesn't need universal proof. One only is one person. Who is it? You don't have to understand, that's a secret. The internet doesn't ask for universal agreement. It only asks for curiosity. Someone somewhere presses play, not because it's trending, not because it's famous, but because something about the title, the sound, the voice feels interesting. That small moment of curiosity changes everything before the internet. Taste moves slowly, a few gatekeepers decided what mattered, what was worth hearing, what was worth watching. But now everyone has a door, everyone has a stage, everyone has a camera, and suddenly millions of small interests appear. Some people love fashion, some people study music production, some people restore old cameras, some people analyze animation, some people build mechanical keyboards, some people spend hours perfecting skate tricks. Every one of those passions is deep, detailed, and invisible to someone else. But invisibility doesn't mean it lacks value. It simply means you're looking from the outside. The people inside see something different. They see details, history, technique, creativity. That's what passion does, it reveals layers. Someone explaining why a sound works, why a melody matters, why a piece of culture means something. That energy is impossible to fake. You hear it in the voice, a husky tone, a little rough, not polished, but a light, even motion hiding a sudden rhythm. And suddenly the music feels personal, even if you don't know the artist, even if the style is unfamiliar, because authenticity travels further than expectation. People don't stay for perfection, they stay for sincerity. But critics often miss that. They see numbers, followers, views, and assume randomness. They assume popularity should match their taste. But the internet is not one audience, it's millions, each one building its own world. Your feed, someone else's feed, completely different, yet all real. That's why curiosity matters more than agreement. You don't need to share the interest to respect the passion. You only need to recognize someone cares deeply, and caring deeply is never strange, it's human. Every person, even the loudest critic, is something they care about, something they defend, something they could talk about for hours. That's their hill, their fascination, their curiosity. So when someone asks, why do people like this? Why does anyone watch? Maybe the answer is simpler than the question. Because someone's curious enough to listen, curious enough to stay, curious enough to understand. And once curiosity begins, connection follows quietly, naturally, naturally, until suddenly what once looked strange feels familiar. Not because the world changed, but because curiosity open the door. that is loud, too loud sometimes. Every second, a new opinion, a new argument, a new voice, trying to be heard above the noise. There's somewhere inside the endless stream. There's something quieter, something real. Signal, not everyone notices it. Most people scroll fast, jumping from trend to trend, from headline to headline. But curiosity works at a different speed. Curiosity slows down, it listens, it studies, it notices details that others ignore. A creator explaining a niche subject, a musician exploring an unusual sound. A small community sharing the same fascination. That signal, not loud but strong, because it connects. The problem is noise always appears first. People questioning, why does this exist? Why is this popular? Why do people watch? The question sounds simple, but behind it there's an assumption that taste should be universal, that popularity should make sense, but culture never followed that logic. Every generation creates something new, something unfamiliar, something strange. At least at first, hip-hop once sounded too raw, too different, too far from traditional music. People dismissed it, until it became the sound of an era. Anime once looked too unusual, too foreign, too niche, until millions found meaning in it. Gaming once looked like a distraction, until it became an entire industry. Every movement starts a signal, hidden, small, recognized only by the people who care. And those people are enough because passion has momentum. Someone explains what they love, another person listens, then another, then till suddenly a small fascination becomes a culture. That's how music spreads, that's how communities grow. Not through noise, through signal. You can hear it in the voice when someone sings, without trying to impress, just trying to express. A rough tone, the husky edge, a melody that feels slightly imperfect but honest. Honesty travels further than perfection. That's why people stay, because authenticity cuts through noise. You might not understand the style, you might not share the interest, but you recognize the sincerity. His sincerity creates trust. Trust builds audiences, not overnight, but steadily, quietly, until the signal becomes impossible to ignore. The critics still exist, they always will, because noise is easy. Anyone can dismiss, anyone can question, anyone can judge, but signal acquires attention, acquires patience, acquires curiosity, and curiosity is rare. That's why the people who care find each other across feeds, across countries, across languages. Someone hears the same rhythm, someone feels the same emotion, someone recognizes the same signal, and suddenly a stranger's voice feels familiar. A new sound, it feels meaningful, and a quiet signal becomes a shared experience. That's how culture grows, not by being loud, but by being real, because real signal always finds the right listeners.
Not everything is meant for you, that's a part people forget. The internet is not a single stage, it's millions of small rooms, each one filled with different music. Yeah, different interests, different obsessions. You walk into one room and suddenly everyone there loves something you never even noticed. They speak about it with excitement, with detail, with the kind of enthusiasm that only appears when someone truly cares. And from the outside it might look strange, unfamiliar, even pointless, but from inside it makes perfect sense. That's the difference between audience and observer. Observers scroll past, audience stays. Observers ask, why does this exist? Audience asks, what makes this interesting? Those two questions shape two completely different worlds, because curiosity opens doors, judgment closes them. Every niche community began with curiosity. Hip-hop, skate culture, anime, gaming, independent music. Every scene, every movement started small, started strange, started misunderstood, until enough people listened, watched it, explored and recognized something authentic. That authenticity is impossible to fake. You hear it in someone's voice, a rough tone, a husky edge, a melody that feels unpolished but honest. Sometimes that honesty is exactly what people need in a world full of perfectly produced them notice even if they can't explain why. That's how music spreads, not through universal approval, through connection. One person hears something, feels something, shares it. Another person listens, another person stays, until suddenly a sound, a creator, a community appears. But the critics still scroll past, confused, looking at something outside their algorithm, and asking, why is this popular? Why do people care? But popularity is no longer universal, it's personal. Your feed, your interest, your curiosity build your world, and someone else is building a completely different one. Both real, both meaningful, even if they never overlap. That's what freedom of curiosity looks like. You don't have to understand every community, you don't have to enjoy every sound, you don't have to follow every creator, you only have to accept that someone else does, and that's enough. Because somewhere someone hears the same voice, feels the same emotion, recognizes the same signal, and suddenly a stranger's song becomes their favorite sound. But because everyone loves it, but because they do, and that's the real power of taste, not universal approval, personal connection. So when someone asks, why does anyone watch this? Maybe the answer is already obvious. Because the internet was never built for one algorithm, it was built for millions of different ones. You only hear it if you listen, not just casually, not just while scrolling, but really listening. That's the difference between noise and meaning. Most things online move too fast. People jump from clip to clip, from opinion to opinion, but curiosity moves slower. Curiosity stays, it pauses, it rewinds, it asks questions. That's why some creators feel invisible until suddenly they aren't, because someone finally listened, not just heard but listened. The internet rewards attention more than popularity. Someone explaining a strange detail about music, about design, about a niche hobby, about something most people overlook. That explanation doesn't reach everyone, it reaches the right person, the one curious enough to stay. That moment creates connection, connection creates audience, and audience creates community. But the outside world doesn't always see that, they only see the result. A channel with followers, a song with streams, a creator with fans, and the question appears, why do people like this? Why does this exist? But the answer is almost always the same. Because someone took the time to listen. Listening is rare, not everyone wants to slow down, not everyone wants to explore. It's easier to judge, easier to dismiss, easier to move on. But curiosity asks for patience when you listen carefully. You hear emotion in a voice, a husky tone, a melody that carries more feeling than perfection. Sometimes that roughness is exactly what people need, because perfection can feel distant, but imperfection feels human. Music connects that way, not through flawless sound, through honest expression. A voice that sounds real, a lyric that feels personal, a rhythm that matches your mood. That's what people remember, not the trends, not the numbers. The feeling someone sings and a listener recognizes the emotion, even if the genre is unfamiliar, even if the artist is unknown. Because emotion travels faster than popularity, and once someone lives, they stay, they replay, they share. By bringing polarity, they share. They bring another listener, another, until the signal spreads. one person listening, another person recognizing, another person connect with, until suddenly what once sounded strange feels familiar, all because someone decided to listen. People say don't die on that hill, as if passion is something you should abandon when others disagree, as if caring deeply about something is embarrassing. But every culture, every movement, every idea started with someone standing on a hill, refusing to leave. Hip-hop had hills, skate culture had hills, every mission had hills, gaming had hills. Every interest that once looked strange was defended by people who believed in it before anyone else did. The internet made those hills visible before you might have felt alone, like in something obscure, studying something niche, talking about details most people ignore. You'll find thousands standing on the same ground, people who care just as much, people who notice the same small things. The connection changes everything, but critics still appear, scrolling through content, confused, looking at something they don't understand, and asking why does anyone like this? Why is this popular? Why do people watch? But the truth is simple, popularity is not universal anymore. The world is too large, curiosity too diverse. There are millions of hills now, music scenes, creating communities, hobbies, circles, interest groups, each one small, focused, passionate, and the people inside don't need approval, they only need each other. That's what community is. Recognition, someone explaining a tiny detail, and another person saying I noticed that too. Someone singing a melody, and another person saying that voice feels real. Someone making a strange video, and another person saying I love this. That moment is culture forming, not through mass approval, but through shared curiosity. A husky voice breaking through a beat, a sound that feels a little different, a little rough, a little human. Sometimes that imperfection is what people connect with, because it feels honest, and honesty travels further than perfection. That's why people stay, even when critics question, even when outsiders don't understand, because passion creates gravity, it pulls people together. One listener, then another, until suddenly the hill is no longer small, and the people who once stood there alone realized they were never alone. So if someone asks us, why do people like this? Why do they care? Why do they stay? Maybe the answer is already obvious, because someone somewhere heard the same voice, felt the same emotion, recognized the same passion, and decided this hill is worth standing on, even if the rest of the world doesn't understand. Because every person has something they would defend, something they would refuse to abandon, something they would stay with, even when others walk away. That's not stubbornness, that's identity, and identity always finds its people who Everything looks strange until it doesn't. That's the pattern. Yeah. Every culture follows, something appears different, unfamiliar, outside the usual rhythm, and people question it. Why does this exist? Why do people like it? Yeah. Why does anyone care? The questions always sound the same, but history always answers them the same way. Time, because time reveals curiosity, and curiosity reveals connection. Yeah, 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 yeah. Hip-hop was strange once, so was skate culture, so was gaming, so was anime, so was every niche interest that eventually found its audience. At the beginning, only a few people cared, a small group paying attention, exploring details, sharing excitement. Everyone else looked confused, but curiosity doesn't need a crowd. It only needs a signal, someone speaking about something they genuinely love, someone explaining the detail most people overlook, someone creating a sound that feels a little different, a voice slightly rough, slightly husky, not perfect but emotional. Sometimes that imperfection is exactly what people hear, because perfection can feel distant, but honesty feels close. Music works that way. You hear a tune, a melody, a rhythm, and suddenly it feels familiar, even if the style is new, even if the artist is unknown. Emotion travels across genres, across languages, across cultures. That's why listeners stay. They recognize the sincerity, but critics rarely hear that part. They scroll quickly, they see numbers, followers, streams, views, and they ask, why does this exist? But the audience already answered. They answer by listening, by staying, by sharing, because curiosity builds community. Someone discovers a song, we play it again, they send it to a friend, that friend listens, and suddenly 2 people care, then 3, then 10, then thousands. Not because the world decided together, but because curiosity is spread naturally. That's how culture grows, quiet signals traveling through interested minds, until something once called strange becomes familiar. And once something feels familiar, yeah, the critics disappear, not because they change their minds, but because the world moved forward, and the sound, the idea, the community get grow. Everything begins as strange. The curiosity always decides what stays and what fades. So when someone asks, why do people like this? Why does this exist? Maybe the answer is simply patience, because time turns strange ideas into culture. Curiosity is always the beginning. Taste was never meant to be democratic, not the way people treat it online. Every day someone posts something, a video, a song, a strange hobby immediately. The comments arrive, why is this popular? How does this have so many followers? As if interest should be voted on, as if enjoyment requires consensus. But taste is not a vote, taste is personal. It grows quietly inside curiosity. Someone hears a sound and something clicks, not because everyone agrees, but because it resonates. Music works that way, a voice with a little roughness, a husky tone that carries emotion, a melody that feels slightly imperfect but honest. Sometimes that honesty is exactly what people hear. In a world full of polished noise and perfection, feels human, and humanity connects. That connection creates listeners, not the loud ones, not the critics, but the quiet ones, the ones listening with headphones late at night, the ones replaying a song because it reminds them of something, a moment, a memory, a feeling. Those listeners don't argue, they don't debate, they simply say that's how communities grow quietly. One person, then another, until suddenly a sound, a voice, a creator is no longer invisible. But the critics still look confused. They expect taste to follow rules, they expect popularity to make sense, but culture has never followed rules. Hip-hop didn't, anime didn't, and every creative movement looks strange until enough people connected with it. That's the pattern. Curiosity appears, connection conversation follows, community forms, and suddenly something once dismissed becomes meaningful. But the critics don't notice the process, they only see the result. They see numbers, followers, views, popularity, and they assume something must be wrong. But the audience is rarely random, they arrive because something resonated, because someone shared a perspective that felt real. That's the part numbers can't explain. Why someone presses play, why someone listens again, why someone cares. This caring is not logical, it's emotional, it's instinct, it's curiosity. You don't choose what fascinates you, it simply happens, and when it does you stay. You listen, you learn, you connect. That's how taste works, not through agreement, through resonance. Millions of people, millions of interests, millions of small worlds, all existing at the same time, and none of them require permission. So when someone asks, why do people like this, maybe the answer is simpler than they expect, because taste was never meant to be evolved. It was meant to be discovered, one curious mind at a time. The internet didn't divide taste, it revealed it. Before screens, before feeds, before endless videos, people believed everyone liked the same things, or at least they believed they were supposed to. Music charts, television schedules, magazine covers, everything pointed toward the same center, a single direction, a single culture. But curiosity was always wider, hidden in small groups, in bedrooms, in basements, in local scenes. People quietly loving what the main street ignored. Then the internet arrived and suddenly those quiet interests found each other across cities, across countries, across languages. Someone uploading a song, someone explaining a hobby, someone sharing an obsession, somewhere else a stranger recognizing the same fascination. That moment changed culture forever, because now taste doesn't move in one direction, it moves in millions. Someone listens to hip-hop, someone studies jazz, someone loves animation, someone builds skateboards, someone restores cameras, someone analyzes movies, every interest, deep detail, meaningful to someone but invisible to someone else. That difference confuses the critics, they see a creator, a song, a channel, and they ask, why do people like this? Why does this exist? But the question misses the point, because the audience already answered. They answered with attention, with curiosity, with connection. Someone hears a voice, a husky tone, a melody that feels raw, unpolished, human, and suddenly the sound resonates, not because it's perfect, but because it's real. That's the moment when taste becomes connection. Music doesn't ask for universal approval, it asks for feeling. If someone feels something, they stay, they listen, they share, and slowly a community appears, not massive, not uniform, but real. The internet didn't create one audience, it created millions, millions of small worlds, each one built around curiosity, each one filled with people who care about something specific, something meaningful, something that makes sense inside their world and maybe nowhere else. That's the taste divide, not conflict, difference, and difference is healthy, cause culture moves forward through curiosity, not agreement. So when someone asks, why do people like this? Why does this exist? Maybe the answer is simpler than it sounds, because someone somewhere heard the same voice, felt the same emotion, recognized the same curiosity, and decided this is for me. That decision is all culture needs, not millions, just enough people curious enough to listen. And once curiosity begins, taste agitated, disconnected. A young singer standing inside a sound that feels older than the room, older than the moment, older than the story. They've lived so far, it's not experience, not exactly. It's sensitivity, the ability to feel something deeply before life fully explains it. Music has always carried that mystery. A melody written decades ago, still moving someone today. A voice from another era, still echoing through modern headphones. That's the strange thing about sound, it doesn't age, it travels. A chord progression played on a dusty piano can still feel alive inside a digital studio. A rhythm from old records can still move inside a modern hip-hop beat. And when a young voice steps into that space, something unexpected happens. The past feels present, the present feels nostalgic. A husky tone breaking through a simple melody. A voice that sounds like it remembers something, even if the singer is still discovering life. That's what people hear, not age. Emotion, the way a word lingers, the way a note bends, the way a breath sits between lyrics. Those small details make a voice feel human in a world full of perfectly edited sound. Human voices stand out, not because they're flawless, but because they're honest. And honesty always travels further than perfection. That's why retro sounds never disappear, they simply wait for new voices to carry them forward. Someone young listening to old records, finding something inside. A melody, a tone, a feeling, and deciding to continue that story. Not repeating it, but translating it a classic chord through a modern rhythm of vintage atmosphere inside. Inquiry, production, a husky voice bridging generations. Listeners feel that even if they can't explain it, they inside the music before the internet. Artists discover music slowly through records, through radio, through local scenes. But today everything exists together. Oh, vinyl records, classic hip-hop beats, retro soul harmonies, modern production, all waiting inside the same world. A young artist can listen to sounds from 50 years ago and feel inspired, not to copy them, but to reinterpret them. A vintage chord placed over a hip-hop rhythm, a nostalgic melody floating inside a digital mix, past and present speaking to each other inside the same song. That's why listeners feel something even when they can't explain it. Because emotion recognizes emotion. A voice slightly rough, slightly fragile, breaking through the rhythm like a memory you never lived but somehow understand. That's the power of an old feeling. Inside a young voice, a reminder that art doesn't belong to generations, it belongs to expression. Someone sings and the sound carries stories older than the singer and newer than the listener. That space between past and future is where timeless music lives, a retro warmth inside a modern beat. A young artist echoing something that existed long before yet still feels new. That's the moment when music stops being just sound and becomes a bridge between time. A young echo from an old soul traveling forward through rhythm, through melody, through listeners who hear something they recognize even if they can't name it. Because some emotions never disappear, they simply wait for a new voice to sing them again. And when that happens, the echo becomes a song. Some songs feel like they existed before the singer was even born. A melody floating through time, waiting for a new voice to carry it. That's the strange thing about music. Emotion doesn't age, it only changes shape. A chord written decades ago can still feel completely alive inside a modern rhythm. When a young voice steps into that space, something magical happens. The past finds a new story, a husky tone, soft but powerful, slightly rough, slightly fragile, breaking through a simple beat and listeners pause, because the feeling is familiar even if the sound is new. Maybe the singer hasn't lived long enough to collect all the memories that the song suggests, but emotion doesn't wait for experience. Sometimes sensitivity is enough. A young artist listening to old records. The melody, something timeless, something universal, and deciding to sing it in their own voice. That's how music travels across generations. Someone writes a song, years pass, decades pass, and another artist finds the same feeling, hidden in the harmony, hidden in the rhythm, hidden in the space between notes. siren sound to arrest, meeting in the same moment. Listeners recognize it even if they can't explain why, because emotion is recognizable across time, across culture, across age. A voice young but carrying something deeper, a feeling that sounds like it arrived from another era, yet somehow feels completely present. That's what timeless music does. It moves the distance between past and now. A listener hears the song late at night, headphones on, city quiet, and the melody feels like a memory, even if they never lived that moment. Because emotion is shared across generations, the past speaking softly through a new voice, and the future listening carefully through a new era song. Born today but feeling like it started long before any of us were here. And that is the power of music that existed before our time, yet somehow born to this moment. Some songs feel like they belong to tomorrow and yesterday at the same time. A young voice carrying old emotion, a modern rhythm holding vintage warmth. It's a strange balance, but it works because music no longer lives inside one decade. Time collapsed inside headphones. Someone born in the streaming era can fall in love with vinyl records, old soul melodies, classic hip-hop grooves, jazz harmonies from a different generation. And when they create, those sounds return, not as copies but as evolution. A vintage chord under a modern beat, a retro melody inside a digital studio, a husky voice singing something that feels familiar. Even when it's new, that familiarity is powerful, because listeners don't only search for innovation, they search for feeling, a melody that reminds them of something, even if they can't explain what a voice that sounds honest, even if they never heard the artist before. Sometimes that honesty lives inside imperfection, a breath, a crack in the tone, a note that feels slightly fragile. Those moments make music human, and humanity is what connects people across generations. A young artist singing a melody that feels older than their own story, and listeners pause because the sound feels timeless, not trapped in the past, not chasing the future, just existing between them. That's where the most interesting music lives, in that space where old ideas meet new voices, where nostalgia meets curiosity, where memory meets discovery. Every generation finds its own way to revisit the past. Some remix it, some sample it, some reinterpret it, but the goal is always the same, to keep emotion alive. Because music is not about when a sound was created, it's about how it makes people feel. A retro chord still carries warmth, the hip-hop groove still carries rhythm, a husky voice still carries emotion. And when those elements combine, the result feels strangely familiar, like a memory from the future. That's why voice, expressive, a young voice, learning from the past while building something new. A song that feels like yesterday but moves like tomorrow. Future vintage, a sound that exists between time and somehow feels perfectly high. Some songs arrive like the end of a conversation that started long ago. A melody drifting in soft and pretty, as if it traveled years before finding this moment. A voice enters, young but carrying something older. A husky tone full of warmth, full of quiet gravity. And listeners pause because the sound feels familiar, even when it's new. That's the strange language music speaks. It doesn't follow time, a chord written decades ago still knows how to move someone. A rhythm born in one generation still walks comfortably inside another. Somewhere in the past, someone played a piano in a quiet room. Another person heard that melody and carried it forward. Years later, someone else finds the same feeling hidden inside those chords. Not copying, not repeating, but understanding. A young artist hearing something timeless inside old records, inside dusty harmonies, inside the swing of hip-hop drums, and deciding to keep the emotion alive. That's how sound evolves, past and present, sharing the same space. A retro warmth inside, modern rhythm, a voice not yet heavy with years, still somehow sounding like it remembers something deeper. Maybe memory doesn't only belong to experience. Maybe music lets people borrow it. Borrow the sadness, borrow the nostalgia, borrow the quiet strength of older voices, and express it in their own tone. That's why listeners stay, because the feeling is honest. A note bending slightly, a breath between phrases, a word that lingers just a second longer than expected. Those small imperfections create humanity, and humanity travels further than perfection. The beat continues, soft boom bap pulse, steady and warm like footsteps through time, carrying melody forward. Every generation adds a voice, another perspective, another interpretation, until the original sound becomes something bigger. Not owned by the past, not trapped in nostalgia, but alive, growing, changing, echoing. That echo is what listeners hear. A young singer standing in the present, holding a sound that feels timeless. Future listening to the past breathing inside the future, and somewhere between those two moments, a song appears, quiet, warm, honest, a final echo from yesterday, still traveling toward tomorrow. Toward tomorrow. The person singing it, you hear it and you imagine someone who has lived a long time, someone who understands more than their years. But then you learn they're young, still discovering the world, still figuring things out, still walking through life like the rest of us. That contrast feels powerful, because it reminds you that inside a digital beat. A husky voice singing something that feels timeless, even though the singer is just beginning their story. Maybe that's the real beauty of music today. Nothing belongs to one era anymore. Every sound, every influence, every feeling can exist together. Someone young, channeling the emotion of decades past. Someone new speaking with the weight of old stories. And somehow it works, because sincerity is stronger than age. When someone sings with real emotion, you don't ask how old they are, you just listen. And that's how culture moves forward, not by copying the past, but by blending it, reinterpreting it, allowing new voices to carry old feelings into new spaces. That's why retro sounds still feel alive. They're not frozen in history, they're evolving through new artists, through new stories, through voices that understand emotion even before life has fully explained it. Maybe that's what an old soul really means. Not someone who lived a long time, but someone who feels deeply. Someone curious enough to listen to the past while still building the future. Music does that, it connects time, a voice from today, echoing a feeling from decades ago. And suddenly the distance disappears. A young singer, a retro melody, a modern hip-hop groove, all existing in the same moment, reminding us that emotion doesn't belong to one generation. It belongs to anyone brave enough to express it. And when that happens, age disappears, trends disappear, only the feeling remains. A voice, a rhythm, a story, traveling through time and landing in someone's headphones exactly when they needed to There's a rhythm that feels older than the moment, a groove that sounds like it traveled through decades before landing inside a modern beat. A dusty chord, a warm melody, a drum pattern that swings instead of rushing. And suddenly the present moment feel nostalgic. That's the magic of vintage sound. It reminds people that music has memory. Every record carries echoes of another time, another room, another musician, another story. And when a young voice steps into that sound, something unexpected happens. The contrast creates emotion. A singer just beginning a story, yet sounding like they understand something deeper. Not because they lived it, but they feel it. They feel it. They feel it. Emotion travels across generations. You don't need the same memories to understand the same feeling. A husky voice breaking through a beat, soft, textured, a little fragile, and listeners pause because the tone feels real in a world where sound is often perfect. Perfect tune and perfect editing, perfect time and imperfection becomes powerful. A breath between lines, a note that bends slightly, a word that lingers. Those details make music human, and humanity is what connects people. Not just rhythm, not just melody, but feeling. That's why retro sound never disappears. Every generation rediscovers it. Someone young listening to old records, feeling inspired to continue the emotional language hidden inside them. A vintage chord placed inside a modern studio, a classic rhythm reimagined through hip-hop drums, past and present speaking together inside one song. Listeners hear that even if they don't analyze it, they simply feel that the music is familiar even when it's new, because emotion doesn't belong to a specific year, it belongs to the moment. A voice sings and someone listens. That moment creates connection across time, across generation, across different lives. A retro groove carrying a modern voice, a young art ecstasy, full of emotion, even when the singer is young. You hear the tone and imagine history. Late night studios, old records spinning, musicians learning from sounds that existed long before them. But the strange thing about music today is that time collapsed, everything exists together. A teenager can fall in love with soul records from decades ago, classic hip-hop from another generation, jazz harmonies recorded before they were born. And when they create all those influences, blend a vintage melody inside a modern beat, a nostalgic chord floating over hip-hop drums, a husky voice carrier, the emotion that feels older than its years. That contrast is powerful because it reminds us emotion doesn't belong to an era. A song from the past and a song from today can carry the same feeling: loneliness, curiosity, love, reflection. Those emotions don't expire, they simply change their sound. That's why retro music never disappears. It evolves. Someone young hears an old record and suddenly it becomes new again. A classic rhythm reimagined, a familiar harmony, given a new voice. The past and the present speaking together inside the same song. That's what makes music feel timeless. A listener hears it and can immediately place the ever error. Is this old? Is this new? Is it both? That question is part of the magic, because timeless music doesn't belong to a specific year. It belongs to emotion, and emotion always finds listeners. A husky voice breaking through a quiet beat, a melody that feels nostalgic even when it's new. And suddenly the song feels familiar, like something you've always known, even if you're hearing it for the first time. That's the power of blending time. Old songs. Modern rhythm, all existing in the same moment, reminding us that music doesn't lose, it simply changes its voice. And every generation adds another layer to the same story, spinning forward like a vinyl record, still tying in the new in another era. Music followed clear timelines. Each generation had its own sound, but now everything exists in the same moment. Old records, new producers, vintage instruments, digital studios, a classic chord meets a modern beat, a retro melody meets hip-hop rhythm, and suddenly a song exists outside time. That's why listeners pause when they hear a voice like that. Not because it's perfect, but because it's real. Because sincerity translates across generations, across styles, across expectations. Someone hears it late at night, city lights outside, headphones on, and the music feels familiar. Even if the artist is new, even if the sounds are familiar, even if the artist is new, even if the sound blend in time. You don't replace the past, you reinterpret it. You listen to the echoes, you learn from the melodies. You carry them into new spaces. That's how culture moves forward, not by forgetting, but by remembering and reimagining. Someone young listening to old music, finding meaning, feeling something and deciding to continue the story. That's why retro sound never disappears, because every generation finds its own voice inside it. A voice that sounds somehow timeless. A voice that reminds us emotion doesn't belong to the press. It belongs to anyone brave enough to sing it. And when that happens, a song stops being just music. It becomes a bridge between yesterday and now. Sometimes a voice feels older than the room. A young singer standing inside a sound that feels decades deep. Vintage chords, dusty rhythm, a melody that carries the weight of memories they haven't even lived yet. And somehow it works because emotion doesn't belong to time. It belongs to honesty. A young voice can still carry sadness, curiosity, reflection, because feeling deeply is not something that waits for age. The internet changed how artists grow. Before, a musician might hear only the sounds around them, the radio, local records, the music of their era. But now everything exists at the same time. Old soul records, classic hip-hop beats, retro jazz harmonies, modern pop melodies, all living together inside the same headphones. A teenager today, a teenager today might fall in love with music from 30 years ago, from 50 years ago, from a different country, from a different culture. And when they create, those influences blend. A vintage chord under a modern beat, a retro melody inside a hip-hop rhythm, a husky voice carrying emotion that feels strangely timeless. It's not imitation, it's reinterpretation. No feelings, new perspective. That's why music keeps evolving, not by replacing the past, but by rediscovering it. Someone young hearing something old and realizing the emotion still matters. Love still matters, loneliness still matters, curiosity still matters. Those feelings never age, they simply change their sound. A voice enters slightly rough, a little smoky, a tone that feels a little older than expected. And listeners pause because something about it feels real. In a world full of perfectly edited sound, real emotion feels different. You can hear it in the breathing, in the phrasing, in the quiet spaces between the words. That's what makes a voice memorable. Not perfection, but personality. And personality is what connects artists to listeners. Someone hears that voice late at night, headphones on, city quiet, and suddenly the sound feels familiar. Even if the artist is new, even if the style is different, because emotion travels easily across time, across genres, across generations. A young artist carrying an old feeling, a retro melody moving through a modern rhythm. Two eras meeting in the same song. That collision is what makes music feel alive. Past and present speaking to each other inside the same moment, reminding us that art is never limited by aid, only by honesty. And when honesty appears, people recognize it, no matter when the sound was born or how old the voice might be.